Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Hi students, welcome to the session. In this session, we are going to talk about the role of hormones in initiating the reproductive function. We've already seen that how different sex hormones are responsible for the development of secondary sexual characters. Also, we are going to study in this particular session that how the reproductive function of these glands, that is the testis and the ovary, begins, right? How do they mature and what influences their maturity? Now, before we study, before we understand that, let's understand a few terms. When we were talking about the glands, we said that there were two kinds of gland. One, the example of first type was the sweat glands and the sebaceous glands, which had duct in them, and through the duct they released their secretions. Whereas other kind of glands which we talked about were the endocrine gland. These glands were your ductless glands. That means they release their secretions into the bloodstream. Now, what exactly happens is that these endocrine glands, once they release their secretion, it goes to the target site. Now, what exactly is target site? Target site is the organ on which the hormones act upon, right? So let's say if we think about our thyroid gland, right? So whenever thyroid gland is releasing some of the hormones, it will act upon certain area, certain organ of the body. That particular organ is called as the target site. So the secretion of endocrine glands reaches this target site through the bloodstream, right? These endocrine glands are also called as the ductless glands because they do not have duct in them, right? But instead they use the bloodstream to allow the hormones to reach their target site, right? Now, once the hormones reaches the target site responds according to the hormone, right? So whatever hormone reaches, say for example, when we are talking about in the previous session, when we were talking about the testis and the ovary, we said that there was a particular type of gland which allowed the maturation of both of these glands, and that gland was called as the pituitary gland. So the hormones released by the pituitary gland, when they reach the target site, that is testis or ovary, the testis and ovary respond to that particular hormone, right? So basically there are different kinds of endocrine glands or the ductless glands present in our body, and the testis and ovaries are one of them. Testis and ovary are your testis and ovaries. What do they release? They release sex hormones. These hormones are responsible for the development of the secondary sexual characters of the in the human body, right? Now these hormones, like I already told you, sex hormones are further in the control of pituitary gland, right? This is known as the master gland of the body because the secretions of the pituitary gland not only handle or not only take care of the testis and ovary, but also different other glands. So the release or the hormones released by the pituitary gland act upon the testis and ovary and causes both of them to mature. In the ovaries, it causes the ova to mature, right? Causes the maturation of ova, and in the case of testis, it acts upon the release and production of sperm, right? So the secretions of the pituitary glands are helping or rather causing the development of the testis and ovary. These further, when they mature, they start releasing the sex hormone, which are responsible for the secondary sexual character in the human beings. Now let's understand them in a little bit detail. So first of all, what happens is in the beginning, the hormones from the pituitary, they stimulate testis and ovary, to release testosterone in the case of males and estrogen in the case of females. So over here the pituitary gland acts as the master gland, right? This gland releases hormones which act upon testis and ovary. Now, once it is released in the bloodstream, what happens is that these hormones reach the part of the body that is the target site where they have to act upon. And then once they reach that part, what happens is that they stimulate the changes that are happening in the body at the onset of puberty. Let's say when we take an example of the female reproductive system. Here the pituitary gland is releasing a particular type of hormone. This hormone reaches ovary, right? Causes the ovary to release female hormone, that is the estrogen, right? So ovary, what it does, it releases estrogen. Apart from that, it also causes the ova to mature in the ovary, right? Now, once the estrogen is released in the bloodstream, right, where does it reach? It reaches the mammary gland in the breast of the female and cause the development of the mammary gland. So in this way we see this is the target site for the estrogen, right? For the estrogen this is the target site, and for the pituitary gland this is the target site, right? So in this way we see that how the control of how the hormones are responsible for the control or for the development of reproductive function and initiation of the reproductive function. Now here Paheli and Bujo have understood already, and I'm pretty sure you also have understood that what are the changes that mark the onset of puberty, or rather what happens exactly when the puberty is attained. That means it is the beginning of the reproductive function in the human beings. Now it is a very important question that you might also wonder, and this is something which both Bujo and Paheli are also wondering, that whether there is a time period, that means there is a beginning, but whether there is an ending of the reproductive phase as well. So in this next session we are going to talk about the ending of the reproductive phase. That we know that from the age of 11 or 12 the reproductive phase has begun. Now when does it end, right? So all of these things we are going to discuss in the next session. In this session it was important for us to understand that what was the role of your hormones and the glands that they played in the reproductive function, that is beginning of the reproductive function in the human beings. In this session, we are going to answer the query that was asked by Bujo and Paheli in the previous session. That was that they wanted to know that if the reproductive life began, whether it continues or it has to end sometime. Now we've already seen that how the reproductive phase begins in the human beings when the production of gametes begin. That is, in males the sperm, and in females the egg is released, right? So production of gametes marks the beginning of reproductive life in the adolescence. So the question here arises that whether there is an end to it. How long do the reproductive phase last, and what are the reasons of the the longevity? That means for how long, if I say that in females the reproductive phase lasts for up to say 40 years, so why it is lasting only up to 40 years and not extending anymore? So all of these things we are going to study in this. Simply we are going to talk about the reproductive phase of life in human beings. So from what age till what age do the reproductive phase in human beings last, right? Now When we are talking about the females and in the males, the reproductive phase is different. That means in males, the production of sperm and the maturation of gametes lasts for much longer time when you compare it in the case of females, right? In the female, reproductive phase begins at the age of 10 to 12 years, and generally it ends at the age of 45 to 50 years, right? Whereas in the case of males, this is not the case. In the males, the reproductive or the puberty begins at 10 to 12 or 11 to 12 years of age, but it lasts longer, right? So what we are going to talk here is about the reproductive phase in the case of females. When I'm saying that the reproductive phase is ending at 45 to 50 years, then what is the reason that this is the age where the females are no more or they do not have the capability of reproduction, right? So let's understand this. First of all, it's important to understand that the how what happens at the time of puberty. At the time of puberty, we have seen that the ovary enlarges and the maturation of ova takes place. This ova is released every month by the ovary, right? So say in 1 month one egg is released, right? Now, what exactly is the relevance of this particular information? Why do we have to understand this information? Because the reason is that in females there is a limited number of eggs present inside the ovary. What exactly happens at this time is, let's understand. During the time, that is, we say that in 1 month only one time the egg is released. So what happens during that phase, during that 1 month? What are the events that are occurring? Let's understand that. The very first thing which happens is that the ova begins to mature at the onset of puberty, right? So as soon as the puberty the age of puberty is reached, as soon as the onset of puberty happens, the ova, that is the egg cell, begins to mature in the ovary. Once it's matured, what happens is that it is released once in every 28 to 30 days. So release of ova takes place in 28 to 30 days. So that's why we say it's a cycle of a month, right? Now, what happens when the ova is released? Now, it is important for us to understand that ova is released in the oviduct, that is the fallopian tube, where it remains until the fertilization happens. So there are two things which are happening. There are two scenarios rather. One scenario is where the ova will get fertilized with the help of the sperm, and the other scenario is that the ova will not get fertilized. But before that, what is happening? What are the preparations? What are the changes that are happening in the body? Let's understand that. In the reproductive organ, we saw there were three parts in the case of females. One part was ovary, other important part was the oviduct or the fallopian tube, and the third important part was the uterus. Now, ovary releases the egg, oviduct receives the egg, and over here the fertilization takes place. In uterus, we had seen that how the embryo was embedded. Now, to receive the zygote which develops into the embryo, what happens is development or changes in uterus are taking place. So what happens exactly is that in the uterus, during this time, the lining of the uterus thickens, right? Lining or the wall of uterus thickens, right? Becomes thick. When I'm saying that the walls become thick, that means that the wall of the uterus starts developing an extra layer which with lot of blood capillaries. Why is it necessary? So that when the embryo gets embedded into the uterus, all the blood capillaries are already developed so that the embryo may receive enough of nutrition and support, right? So the development, that is the development of uterus takes place such that it is able to receive the embryo after the fertilization, right? So lining or the wall of the uterus becomes thick, and this thickness is because it has all the blood capillaries in it, right? So it is in case that the fertilization of egg takes place and the formation of zygote occurs, and that zygote descends into uterus as in the form of embryo and gets embedded in it. Now, this is what the preparation that is happening in the uterus. Like I said, there are two scenarios. One is if the fertilization takes place. When the fertilization takes place, simply the process of development of embryo will take place inside the uterus, like we've already studied in the case of in the chapter number 9. If, let's say, the fertilization does not occur, in that case what happens is, if fertilization doesn't occur, fertilization does not occur, right? Then what happens is that the egg is not fertilized. Now what happens, that if the fertilization does not occur, the thickened lining of the uterus, thick lining of uterus, along with the blood vessels are shed off. That means that whatever has the development has taken place, that means the thick lining, the whatever wall has developed already, all of that gets shed off because it is not needed anymore, right? So this all sheds off, and this particular process, right, this process causes bleeding, and this bleeding is called as the menstruation, right? So it causes bleeding in women, and this is called as the menstruation. So the beginning of the menstruation is the beginning of, or marks the onset of puberty in the case of females, right? So this marks the onset of this menstruation marks the onset of the puberty, or the beginning of the reproductive phase. This beginning is called as the menarche, right? It is called as the menarche. That means the beginning of your reproductive phase in the human female. Then there is after say after 45 to 50 years of age, once the beginning has once the menstruation has started, that is at 10 to 12 years of age, there is a set number of eggs, right? There are few numbers of egg in the case of females. In the case of males, you can see that the production of sperm is happening continuously, but this is not the case when in the female body. There are particular number of eggs present in each ovary, and once those eggs have exhausted, no more menstruation will take place. And this process, when the menstruation is stopped, this bleeding is stopped, is called as the menopause, and this happens at the age of 45 to 50 years. And what happens is that the reproductive phase of the female life ends at the age of menopause. In the beginning, during the menarche, what might happen is that the timing of the period might be irregular, but after some time this regularity is maintained, and the whole cycle is occurring in a proper way, right? Now again, this menstrual cycle is further controlled by the hormones, and cycle includes, when we are talking about the menstrual cycle, what does it include? The menstrual cycle includes the maturation of egg. Maturation of egg takes place. Once the maturation has happened, then what happens is the release of eggs takes place. Release of egg, then During this time, thickening of the uterine wall takes place, right? Thickening of uterine wall, right? This uterine wall thickens to receive the embryo, and then there are two scenarios. If no pregnancy, no fertilization occurs, then what happens? Then shedding or breaking of breakdown of uterine walls occur. Uterine wall occurs, right? If pregnancy happens, in the case of pregnancy, right, the pregnancy embryo gets embedded and further developments takes place, right? If the pregnancy is happening, then the embryo gets embedded in the uterine wall, and then one after the other the division occurs, and the development of the further development of the body takes a baby takes place inside the uterus. So these are the two scenario in the case of the menstrual cycle. So beginning of the menstrual cycle is called as the menarche, and the ending is called as the menopause. So the question which Paheli has is that the reproductive life of a woman lasts from menarche to menopause. So that is the correct point over here that she is making, that the reproductive phase is the menarche is the beginning of the reproductive phase in the human beings, female of in human beings, and the menopause is the ending, right? And during that time only the female has the capability of reproduction. After menopause, pregnancy will not take place, because maturation of egg does not happen, because eggs are no more present inside the ovary, right? About this you will study in a little more detail in your classes, in your further classes, but as of now it is important to understand about the menstrual cycle and about the starting and the ending of the reproductive phase in the case of human females, right? Now let's just recapitulate about the what is exactly that we were talking about reproductive phase in the humans. First of all, the menstrual cycle is controlled by the hormones. This include the maturation of egg, its release, thickening of uterine wall, and breakdown if pregnancy doesn't take place. If the pregnancy takes place, that means the egg is fertilized by the sperm. It begins to divide and then gets embedded in the uterus for further development. About this you've already studied in chapter number 9. So this is the scenario in the reproductive cycle in the human beings. In this session, we are going to talk about how is the sex of a baby determined. Now, in the previous sessions, we've talked about that once a particular age is reached, the reproductive organs start developing, and thus causing the formation of the secondary sexual character, and causing the starting of a reproductive life. But before that only, the baby, when it is born, it always is either a female or a male. How does that happen? How is it determined? So again, this might be a question which Paheli has, and she has confusion because she heard her mother and her aunt talking about her cousin who is going to have a baby. They were discussing whether she would give birth to a boy or a girl. So she started wondering what makes the fertilized egg develop either into a boy or a girl. Now, this is a very intriguing question, and all of you might have this thing. You might have this confusion that the egg, when we were talking about in the previous session, we saw that the fertilization once occurred. What happens that the fusion of nucleus of the male and the female gamete took place, which caused the formation of zygote, right? So basically the zygote was a single cell caused by the formation or the fusion of the male and female gamete, right? Now in this zygote there is the instructions which are present, which will tell the sex, which will form the sex of the baby. So what does it contain? It contains instructions, right? instructions to determine the sex of the baby. Now, when we were talking about cell in the chapter in the previous chapters, when we were talking about cell of an organism, we said that in the nucleus there was a thread-like structure called as the chromosome, which contained genes, and in these genes there were information of various characteristics of a person, right? So these chromosomes are also the key of the sex determination, that whether the sex of the baby will be a male and or will it be a female, whether the baby will be born as a male or a female. All of this information is contained in the thread like structure called as the chromosome, right? So if you remember, when we were talking about the structure of the nucleus, we said that there was a nuclear membrane, there was nucleus, there was nuclear core, and there was a chromosome. This was the part of the nucleus which had genes in them, and these genes were the unit of inheritance, right? Unit of inheritance, because these genes contained all the information regarding the characters. So basically chromosomes are the ones which will determine the type of character a person will have. Not only that, but it also determines the sex of a person. So how does this happen? Basically in human beings, all the chromosomes that are present inside the nucleus, the number is 23 pairs. That means how many chromosomes? It means that total there are 46 chromosomes in the case of human beings. In different species, these number of chromosomes vary, but in the case of human beings, there are 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes in the nuclei of the cell. Out of these 46, one pair or two chromosomes are called as the sex chromosomes, right? So out of these 23 pairs, basically there are 22 plus 1. That means this one pair is the sex chromosome, right? Sex chromosome. So how many are there? Out of these 46, there are 42 chromosomes plus 2 chromosomes which are the sex chromosome. All of these chromosomes are present inside the nucleus, and these sex chromosomes are the ones which will determine the sex of the child. Now, these sex chromosome are further of two types. One is X and other is the Y chromosome. So there are two types of sex chromosome, X and Y. Now let's understand, once we've understood about the number of the chromosomes that are present in the nucleus, now let's understand how these type of chromosomes are distributed. In the case of male and in the case of female, we have the X chromosome, we have the chromosomes as XX, right? So if you remember, we said that there was a pair of sex chromosome. In female, that pair is XX, whereas in the case of male, the chromosome is XY, right? So female will have XX chromosome, whereas the male will have the XY chromosome. This pair is called as the sex chromosome. Why they are called as the sex chromosome? Because they help in determining the sex of the baby. Now, when the fertilization happens, in the case when we were talking about the formation of male and female gamete, what exactly happens is in female and male both we have how many? We have 46 chromosomes. Now understand this, students, that if the nucleus of the male gamete, that is the sperm, had all the 46 chromosomes, then what would happen? The number in the zygote would double, right? How many it would be? It would be 92 chromosomes might be present with the baby, but this is not the case. What exactly happens is that these 46 chromosomes are divided in such a way that each egg has only 23 chromosomes in it, right? So there are only how many chromosomes? 23 chromosomes. Now understand, when we are talking about the female, right? So because they have two chromosomes, that is XX, so when the division happens, the egg will always get an X chromosome only, right? All the eggs in the female contain only and only X chromosome. But in the case of male, what happens is that male, 50% of the egg 50% of the sperm will have X chromosome, whereas 50% of the sperm has what chromosome? Has Y chromosome. Now understand, when the X chromosome, that is the egg containing X chromosome, gets fertilized with the sperm containing X chromosome, what do we get? We get a female child. When the egg containing X chromosome gets fertilized with the sperm containing Y chromosome, we get a male child, right? So if you look at this picture, this will help you in understanding that the sperm has either a Y chromosome or it has either a X chromosome, whereas the eggs only have X chromosomes. When the X and Y gets fertilized together, a boy is formed, right? So a male child is formed. When the X and X are joined together or they get fertilized, a female child is born. So in this way, we see how sperms are the factor which determine the sex of the baby, right? So sperm, we know, are the male gamete. So what do we understand from this particular process? That it is not the female but the male who decides the gender of the child, right? And there has been a misconception for a very very long time that because female gives birth to the child, it is the female which determines the it is the eggs of the female that determines the gender of the child. But this is not the case. It is because of the male which due to which the gender of the child is determined, right? Also, if you see that there is 50% chance, right? So there, how many it is a 50% probability that the child would be, can be a boy or it can be a girl. There is no such thing which can favor, there is no such mechanism which favors the formation of a male or a female child, right? So the chances are 50% in both the cases. 50% chances are that the child born would be a male, and 50% chances are that the child born would be a female, because of this very reason, right? So in this way, we see how the sex determination takes place in the case of human beings, and what are the sex chromosomes. And also we cleared the misconception that the female is responsible for the determination of the sex of the child.